So hello everybody, this is Kathy Kuntz at Cool Choices. I'm delighted you joined us today for our webinar about employee suggestions on sustainability. I'm excited to talk to you about this new research we pulled together and to hear your thoughts and ideas on this topic. As just a bit of background, Cool Choices is a nonprofit. We work with organizations, private companies, local units of government, schools, to engage people around sustainability in a way that can accelerate the organization's efforts to achieve their corporate goals. So typically the organizations we work with have strong corporate commitments to sustainability and have very often accomplished a lot already and are at a point where they really need to engage the broader population in their organization to be successful forward, and so that's where we come into the equation. And so we're typically brought into those conversations by the sustainability lead or the green team, and typically those folks are juggling a variety of things. They've got in these leading companies that are really leaders in their field on sustainability, they've often got really aggressive, really ambitious long-term targets that they're paying attention to. They've got annual metrics. They've got typically a crazy list of things that they were supposed to have done yesterday. And they're keeping all of that in the air. And as we talk about things, one of the questions I often ask them is so how are you getting employee ideas about what's going on? How are you engaging with your workforce around the opportunities they see to reduce waste or to save water, or depending on what your particular priorities are? And sometimes I know when I ask that question and this person's got all of this stuff that they're doing an amazing job with, they shoot me a look that I'm pretty smart about these things. The look says, "Shut up, Kathy. There's not one more thing I can do." And I completely understand that. I think it's really important, though, to realize that getting that employee feedback is critical, and it's less critical because, so there's two pieces of it. There are some cases where employees are going to point out things that you don't know that are easy to fix, and we'll talk about some of those, and those are quick wins. More often, realistically, they're going to point out things you do know, but you haven't gotten to yet. And that's important too, because really you need to understand that when you're the one trying to make sustainable practices the norm in an organization, and you're talking about the shared values we all have and how important it is to the company to reduce energy usage by this %, or to hit this carbon reduction goal, people are balancing your words with the realities they see every day around their workstation or their cubicle or the factory floor. And so if you're saying that we are completely committed to reducing water usage in all of our operations, and they routinely use a bathroom where there's a toilet that's been running for 3 months, your words don't mean anything. Ultimately, as human beings, what we see, what we experience is much more real than words on paper or spoken by even someone we respect. And so really thinking about, okay, do I have these things in alignment? It's really important to capture what are those things that from an employee perspective suggest we're not living our objectives in the way we want to. You want to capture that. At the same time, you want a way to capture that that isn't overwhelming, because it can easily become overwhelming, and overwhelming even in a negative way. We think we've got a pretty good strategy for this as it integrates into our program. So we do employee engagement programs that are typically 6 weeks long. Folks sign up for our system, they join a team, and over the course of 6 weeks, they get points for their sustainable practices. They get points for taking the stairs, not the elevator, for carpooling to a meeting, a variety of things. They also get points for offering suggestions on specific ways the organization can reduce energy usage or change fleet costs. They get points for what they do, they get some recognition, and ultimately for the organization you get those immediate savings tied to what they did, and you've got this list of opportunities. And that list of opportunities is really what we're going to focus on today, give you a sense of what kinds of opportunities we're hearing about in organizations and how that might give you some interesting food for thought as you're thinking about your own opportunities. So to give you a bit of context here, when we're running a program, typically there are a variety of actions people can claim points for, and some of them are these suggestion cards. So suggest a way to save electricity at work. When someone plays this card, the idea they submit and their name goes into an online stream in that particular program. So if Bill submits an idea about saving water, Amy and Joan and Carl, who are also participating in the program, can see Bill's idea. They can see that Bill suggested it, they can comment on it, they can like it, etc. So there's a layer of kind of immediate transparency that happens in our system. So earlier this year, we thought, you know, we should really look. Let's go back to 2016. Let's looked across about a dozen corporate-based programs. So let's dig into those suggestions that we saw in those programs. That was about 4,000 suggestions across those programs, and see if we can find some commonalities. We were interested in this for a couple of reasons. For us, we were interested to see if there were ideas that encompass multiple organizations, things that we could assign points to and incent everyone to do in future programs. But we're also interested in whether there would be some insights there that would help us and our partners move forward with efforts, and that's really the core of the point of today's conversation. So what did we see when we looked at those 4,000 ideas? As we started, so first let's talk about kind of where the ideas come from. So across the participants, there were, I think the number is about 1,800 participants behind these 4,000 ideas. There's a chunk of people who do not play suggestion cards at all. More than half, though, of all participants offered at least one suggestion, and you can see that there's a quarter of our participants are offering 3 or more. So they might have an idea about water and one about fleet operations and one about recycling. Obviously, those folks who are submitting multiple ideas are a good target group to engage in future initiatives. These are folks who've been thinking about these things and maybe have multiple ideas that they're enthusiastic about. They can be a good cohort for you to take hold of. So we looked at the content of these ideas then, and I think initially we thought, well, we'll talk about the ideas based on the suggestion cards they come from. You know, we'll say this is what came out of the recycle cards and this is what came out of electricity. But part of what we saw when we dug into the content is people are not always completely clear about what saves electricity versus what's about fleet. And so ultimately we really did a deeper analysis of what's the core of every suggestion and put them into entirely new buckets. And so the buckets that we're going to talk about today that they're in, there's a little bit more than a quarter of all of the suggestions were about peer behaviors, things my colleagues are doing that they could be doing differently. About 1 in 5 was about operations or management kinds of issues, and then separate from that, purchasing practices, equipment upgrades, and lighting changes. And we'll take each of those and give you a flavor for sort of what was in the suggestions and some of the implications I think there are for you leading sustainability at an organization. So let's start with peer behaviors. And you know, what we heard here, kind of variety of things. Faucets in kitchens and bathrooms, people leaving lights on, leaving computers on at night, and a good chunk of commentary about people, how much they print, whether they print double-sided, kind of thing. And again, I want to remind you that when someone makes a suggestion, it appears in the stream and other players can see it. And I think we have pretty good evidence that because we frame this as a game, we facilitate some level of coaching. We know that the number of conversations about sustainability go up in organizations when they're implementing cool choices. On average, more than half of employees report that they talk at least weekly to a colleague about sustainability during the program. So there's a layer of folks who are having conversations and maybe even coaching each other about the sort of, Bill, if you took the stairs with me, you could claim points for that and we'd be ahead of that other team, kind of thing. That said, there's still a cohort, and you know, an awful lot of our work is in the Midwest. There's still a cohort of participants who aren't comfortable taking those things on directly. And I think the peer suggestions really reflects that sense that okay, I really wish these people around me were doing something different, and here's a way for me to articulate that. So that's a piece certainly of what goes on here with the peer behaviors. But probably most of you will not be surprised that the predominant discussion area in operations and management was about how warm or cold buildings were. So participants have a lot to say about HVAC settings in their buildings. And this is an interesting one because certainly if you've been around these issues for a long time, and you know, I have a long background in energy efficiency, so I feel like I've been around the thermostat wars for half my life maybe. It can feel like a really unwinnable thing, but I think there's certainly we see opportunities with engagement to take on this issue differently. Some of you might be familiar with the efforts in Japan after the tsunami, when the Japanese power grid was very fragile. They'd lost nuclear power plants. And so to ensure that they didn't have rolling blackouts over the summer, they encouraged people to dress more casually for the office so that the temperature in the office could go up. That's a kind of engagement solution that comes at some of this. I am aware of a credit union in my own community that in order to address their electric demand charges, they created a policy for the sort of back of the office administrative buildings that they increased the temperature in the buildings in the summer, so they reduced their air conditioning load, and they told staff that they were going to raise the temperature, but they were also going to let people dress more casually between Memorial Day and Labor Day. You could wear kind of office-appropriate shorts, capris to work that you wouldn't have normally gotten to wear. The program was hugely popular. One of the findings that surprised the implementers was that people talked about how it simplified their lives. If I can wear capris to work, I can go straight from work to my kid's soccer game, whereas if I need to be dressed for business in my office where no one sees me, then I have to go home before I go to the soccer game, and it's much more complicated sort of thing. So there's this way that by bringing people into the conversation and giving them some agency, you can address this heating and cooling piece. I would say the other theme that we heard most probably in this category was tied to fleet operations. So the kinds of vehicles available in the organization, or the policies around those vehicles, whether there was a way to monitor that people were driving in fuel-efficient manners. You know, that's all kind of encompassed here too, and it's things that so here really you've got employees kind of asking for more kind of management solutions on these things. Help us not be uncomfortable, certainly. The next category of things was tied to purchasing practices, and this is like my favorite category because I'm just sort of intrigued by some of what we saw here. So kind of a range of things. Certainly a good deal of discussion about just the waste that happens inside of purchasing. Think about people talking about when an employee leaves or moves to another location, there needs to be an effort to like put the perfectly good pens from her desk back in the supply closet and recycle some of that. Also some very specific things though. There was in a particular manufacturing site, an employee described how they were purchasing pieces for a process, and essentially they got this packet of like 5 pieces and only used 3 of them, so immediately discarded 2 of the things that came in the package, and really challenging, why are we buying this stuff and paying to ship it to us to recycle it? There has to be a better way. I think it was a good example of a place where sustainability lead has an opportunity to interact with a department in a different way than they might otherwise get information to interact with them. And so there's that chance then to go, oh, is there a better way we could order this? How could we, here's a way that you can maybe become a hero in terms of helping us on our waste management in addition to reducing costs there. The other really cool thing that came out on purchasing was a really strong theme from employees, a plea that their organizations stop enabling them to do things that they knew were not sustainable. So lots of employees saying things like, please eliminate the styrofoam cups in the kitchen so that we don't use them. Stop giving us plastic silverware so that we bring our own and use our own. And I was really intrigued by this because certainly from a behavioral perspective, we know that people default to what's easy. And so when organizations ultimately make it easy for people to pick the non-sustainable choice, they're going to pick it. And so it was really interesting to see a cohort of employees very consistently say, please stop putting this stuff in front of us that isn't very sustainable, you know, and often suggesting some variation of, you've given us all corporate water bottles, please stop also providing plastic water bottles of water in the kitchens. We all have these water bottles, there are drinking fountains, let us use them, kind of thing. And so really interesting, I think, example there. I alluded to this a little bit earlier on the equipment upgrade side. Much of the conversation was about plumbing fixtures in kitchens and bathrooms, faucets that drip, toilets that run, things that in the scheme of things are small, certainly. If you're in an industry like a beverage industry and you're thinking about reducing water, you know, these items are relatively trivial, but they stick out in people's minds. What really encourage you to think about some of these things as the sore thumbs of your organization. You know, there's that way that when I'm not very good as a carpenter, so whenever I pick up a hammer, I inevitably hit my thumb. And so then you've got this thumb that's really sensitive, and everything you do, it seems like you jostle it and touch it. And, you know, 99% of my body is perfectly good, but it's the thumb I'm focused on because it's the thing that's irritated at the moment. And so really thinking about that in this way, that dripping faucet in the women's room on the 3rd floor is symbolic to staff that water isn't that important. And so So addressing it matters even if the water savings there are relatively trivial compared to the other things you're doing. It conveys that message that this is all together, and so you really want to think about that. And particularly, think we saw a lot of comments on water using equipment because water is really visible to people. It's really easy to see wasted water in a way that sometimes other things are a little bit less easy to see. The last category was really about lighting changes, and this covered people wanting more ability to use natural light and not use overhead lighting in particular areas, to have more automated controls of lighting, to have more efficient lighting, folks calling out, hey, there's still really inefficient lighting in these places in our buildings. And so that whole kind of category of lighting opportunities there. I want to pause here a second and just acknowledge that when you are the sustainability lead in an organization and you start hearing all of this, even up front when we are talking to potential partners and they say, okay, wait, you're going to collect suggestions from people? That can feel a little daunting. It feels like, okay, I already know all these things that I need to do, Kathy, and now you're going to just throw at me all the other stuff that people see that's wrong with what we're doing, and why do I need to hear that? Some of that I already know, some of that I don't want to know, some of it is not practical. How does this help me? And my answer is that more than the content of it, it's you hearing that and responding to it, that ultimately we talk about sustainability as a journey, and in organizations, to be really effective, to really accelerate your results, that has to be a shared journey. We have to all be on it together. And that means that when I see something that doesn't seem consistent with what we agreed was our priority, I need a way to communicate that to you. And ideally, you're in a position to say to me, oh, that's an interesting point. Yeah, maybe this is why it's not very high on our list of things to deal with, or this is how we could address it. Always so instead of feeling like those are things that we need to hide or we can't talk about, those are our opportunities for taking this to the next level. And we all want to take this to the next level. So how do we get there together? And it really becomes kind of a core facet of the way you engage people in an ongoing way. With that, I want to pause and open things up for questions. So on the side of your screen, you've got that little GoToWebinar bar. There's an orange arrow at the top. If you don't see this stuff, you can hit the orange arrow and it will pop open, and you'll be able to put in questions that you have about what I've said, what maybe things you thought I would cover that I didn't cover. I'm glad to take those. Give you a second and I'll So I have a great question. This all sounds good in theory, but in practice, we have a bunch of complainers. It seems like a terrible idea to open up a megaphone for them. I think that response is not atypical. I talk to folks who feel like, okay, it's really risky to have this conversation. And a couple of things I would say about this. First, it matters how you frame the conversation. So if I see if I can zip back here, doesn't want to. The thing I want to point out to you, is that you want to have a conversation that's solutions oriented. So we don't give people points for answering identify something dumb in your building. people could identify something dumb, but that's not really constructive. We're giving people points for suggesting a solution, suggest a way for this to happen. And framing it that way, even with a group of complainers, becomes a more productive thing. Yes, there will still be some layer of complaint in there, but you'll get a solution type answer, and that can become a lot more effective. The other thing I think that's an advantage for us is because this is public in our system, that helps quite a bit, because then people have the ability to see what other people are looking at, and that can make a big difference. So, and then there's a, so if that makes sense. Another question, do you think the program helps to broaden employees' concept of sustainability? It seems that the comments only focus on operations, not on the social aspects of sustainability, which is a great question. So for this analysis, our core focus is on the environmental angle of sustainability. We have partners who customize our platform to include more social aspects. We didn't include those in this analysis, but certainly you could, and we thinking about different groups that did things around equity or other kinds of things that could make a difference there. That makes sense. Sorry, I always have to, there's this, okay. And then a question about, so what happens with the suggestions in our program? How does this work? So I maybe wasn't very clear about that before, I apologize. So in the routine of participating, participants will pick a suggestion card, claim points for it. It appears in the stream. We deliver those suggestions back to our partners in the organization in really 3 ways. So it's public immediately in the stream for everyone to see and comment on and all of that. On a weekly basis, so typically there's a suggestion a week thematically in a program. On a weekly basis, we deliver that cohort of suggestions back to our game liaison inside an organization with the request that they identify a few that they comment back in the stream about, that there is something that they might say, oh, this was a fantastic thing that we didn't realize was an opportunity, we'll get on that right away, kind of thing. Or it's great that Amy pointed out that we could do more around carpooling. We're going to institute a new policy about this. Who'd like to be part of the conversation about how to do that kind of thing? And then at the end of the program, we again deliver the entire cohort of suggestions, so they've got the whole of them. And our partners interact with that big list in a couple of different ways. I know of one mid-sized manufacturer who the sustainability lead in that organization takes those suggestions and essentially circles back to the suggester and tries to engage them as a champion for this idea. So she, obviously she does a winnowing of them and kind of prioritizes the ones to go after, but then she will go to someone, she'll say, Bill, you suggested this. Are you willing to act as the champion for this? This is the process you and I will go through to try to make this change happen here. I can think of a couple of other partners who kind of have their green team methodically work through those issues over time. And So that's the answer there. It is looking like I have responded to the questions. I'm not seeing new questions. So with that, I will thank you all for participating today. As is typical, we'll send out a recording of the webinar tomorrow in case you missed something or want to share it with someone. And thanks again for participating, and good luck with the sustainability initiatives in your own organization. Bye now.